Cypress Development Corp's flagship lithium project is located just east of Albemarle's Silver Peak mine in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. A 12-hole exploration drill program for lithium-enriched claystone on Cypress's 100% controlled properties is now underway. Cypress Development Corp trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the Pink's CYDVF, and on Frankfurt's C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Welcome back to the show, Kris.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Canadian taxpayers have paid Kinder Morgan $4.5 billion for a pipeline that may be obsolete in 15 years. A new report says there will be a sudden drop in the demand for oil as more solar, wind, and other sustainable power sources are found to run our vehicles and heat our homes. So perhaps the government would have been better off to put $4.5 billion into new energy sources rather than an old one, oil. What's your opinion?
Well, to deconstruct that entire thing, we are fully in favor of the Kinder Morgan pipeline, so much so that we were actually, and still are, seeking intervenor status in the court case going on between the government of British Columbia and the government of Canada, speaking on behalf of taxpayers, because we think that the project is so essential for a healthy economy and our modern world. And frankly, if we don't have that lifeblood, that is oil and gas, we won't have good-paying jobs to pay the taxes that are imposed upon us. So we're fully in favor of it. To our dismay, the federal government sat on its hands and did next to nothing to enforce its national authority in this case and get the already approved pipeline actually built by the private company that had been given permission to do it. So keep in mind, this was a fully privately owned pipeline by a private company that turns a profit, that was begging money into our hands, that had gone through 5 years of regulatory hearings, and had gotten green lights all the way. So it was well within their right to build the pipeline, but it's within the Canadian federal jurisdiction to make sure that peace, order, and good government is maintained, so that private operations can occur, like the Kinder Morgan pipeline twinning, the expansion of it. So to turn around and see Kinder Morgan walk away from the table because they just can't do business here in this case, in this context, and for the federal government to just fork over $4.5 billion taxpayer dollars was completely unnecessary. It's just astounding that they did this. And then keep in mind that Kinder Morgan had pegged the expansion cost at $7 billion. And that's a lean, mean oil company machine that is used to doing these sort of things. So even if we kept it at that lower amount and imagined that the federal government is somehow able to keep the cost at that rate, we're looking at about $12 billion. Like, it's just a jaw-dropping amount of money, and not a nickel of it needed to be spent. And so right now, we're just gritting our teeth, hoping it gets built as soon as possible, and that they're able actually to resell it to the private industries at a profit. And the idea, frankly, of putting $4.5 billion in Canadian tax dollars into things like wind and solar, that, that might be someday in the future, that corporations are able to provide energy at a sustainable and reliable rate of wind and solar that we can all afford, but that isn't going to happen tomorrow, and it's not going to happen next year. For example, just this hour, if you take a look at what happens in Alberta, more than 90% of their electricity needs is coming from so-called fossil fuels, from coal and from oil and gas. So this idea that somehow in 10 years there will be no demand for oil and gas products around the world, that's just not so. Maybe in the future we can see renewables that are increasing. In fact, some oil companies actually invest in those renewables. And as long as it's affordable and people can make a profit at it and actually use it, that's great. But the idea of plowing $4 billion of taxpayer dollars into something like that, that's not sustainable for us.
We'll have more with Kris Sims right after the break.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Magnum Gold Corp. Inc., MGI on the TSX Venture Exchange. A 2015 drill program on the LH property intersected high-grade gold, including 16.9 meters of 13.58 grams and 11 meters of 20.66 grams per ton gold. A follow-up drill program is planned to further evaluate previously identified subsurface high-grade gold mineralization. Please visit our website at magnumgoldcorp.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Kris Sims. Kris, if the NDP wanted to give the Liberal Party some ammunition to rebuild their base of support in Point Grey, the so-called school tax would be it, wouldn't it?
Yes, it really would. And for those listening who don't know what the school tax is, number one, they're just calling it a school tax. They called it that in the budget, so frankly, people would skip over it and not notice it. But when you take a look at it, it's a property surtax. It's like a wealth tax, basically. So if you're, frankly, fortunate enough to own a home that is now valued at more than $3 million, you have an annual extra tax tacked on top of that property value of 0.2%. If you're over $4 million, it's actually 0.4%, right? So let's envision somehow that you bought a house back in, say, the 60s or the 70s and in that area, in that region, and now, miraculously, it's actually on paper worth more than $8 million. So there's $4 million difference between 4 and 8 times 0.4%. That is a brand new $16,000 a year tax bill that those property owners are facing. And so some people, of course, don't have an $8 million house. They've got a $4 million house, but they're still being hit with a very big surprise tax bill that they didn't campaign on. A lot of people say they voted for, in the case of the Attorney General, Eby, that they voted for him, but they didn't know that this was coming down the pipe. And so what this is in essence a property surtax and a tax on wealth. And some people will say, oh, well, lucky for you, we can barely afford to rent a townhouse in Abbotsford or Chilliwack while we're commuting into work every day. And, that's totally understandable. But if you take a look at the fundamental principle of this, the NDP government is going after some of the longest time residents of Vancouver. Some of the, been there for more than a generation. A lot of them, like I said, bought their homes in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, back when interest rates were high. They worked very hard to pay off their homes. And now, technically, their property is valued at a lot. But a lot of these people don't make a lot of money every year. A lot of them are retired or on fixed incomes. I actually heard from a family they're retired teachers, the two of them. One of the ladies now has a health problem. They're on a very strict fixed income. They want to leave their home, their family home, where they raised their kids. They want to leave this property to their adult children when they leave this world, when they leave us. But now, because of this suddenly imposed government tax, they literally can't afford it. Because if they defer their taxes year over year, their children, their adult children, cannot afford to even inherit the house that they were raised in. And we need to stress, this is private property. This is something that is owned by an individual or a family. But because they're so, on paper, wealthy and well off, and better off than some other people, again, who are struggling to find housing, there's seemingly little sympathy coming from them, from some commentators, and from the government. So this fundamentally is an attack on private property, and they're just trying to pitch it because they don't think that there will be much sympathy for them. But keep in mind that if they've simply surprisingly pegged the tax at starting at $3 million, what happens when they lower it next year? When they suddenly decide they need more money in Victoria, and they lower it to $2 million? Now you're talking about a whole lot of other people who, on paper, are sitting in a home that is technically valued at $2 million. You can throw slap a hockey puck anywhere in Vancouver, and find a house that doesn't look like much, but it's technically valued at $2 million, then what's going to happen? How far down are we going to block this pinko chip? And, it's a major problem. So it's something that people really need to pay attention to. And I think that Eby is really feeling the heat over it. He's hearing directly from his constituents.
Well, I think they all forget at the NDP how Gordon Campbell rose to power with the Liberal Party. I was at the rally at Oak Ridge Mall where the NDP government had slapped a special tax on those homes, and they saw a whole new political movement, and people who never got out and voted got out and voted.
Yes, absolutely. Glenn Clark was finance minister at the time, who, of course, later became an NDP premier of this province. And you're absolutely right. And it was a very similar thing. They tried to, say it was a special kind of property tax. We need the money, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, they did the same thing this time. But now, of course, property values in the Lower Mainland have gone crazy. They've risen exponentially. And so now they've pegged it at $3 million. But again, it's the same thing. So it's simply an attack on private property, and they think that they can get away with it because there will be little sympathy for them. But the reason why the person who's struggling to afford sometimes even rent in the Fraser Valley or out near Delta or whatnot and is commuting in every day, the reason why they need to care about this is not only because of some of the personal circumstances of these people, like the ones I just mentioned, but also because, in principle, if this government is allowed to do this, then they're allowed to go after your private property next. And they're allowed to just decide that they're going to drop the ceiling whenever they want to, whenever they decide that they want to disrupt the housing market or to raise more tax revenue. And so this is going to be a major problem in the future. And so this is the reason why you are seeing protests against this, is because this is a hollowing out of some of the very, very long-time residents of this area. And then keep in mind, who is going to be able to buy these homes now? So if they chase away some of the long-time residents of this region, this neighborhood, who've called it home for generations, like I said, raised their kids there, they want to leave it to their kids, their grandkids want to use it when they're going to school, all sorts of reasons. Frankly, it's their property. If they're going to do this and chase them all out to who knows where they'll be able to sell and go buy somewhere else, who's going to buy it? Who's going to buy that, $6 million house that comes with a massive tax price bill? Those are going to be the just astronomically wealthy, probably people from all around the world. Are they going to just move in and hold lemonade stand sales and yard sales and be part of the local public library committee? What do they envision happening to these areas in the future? And it's not just that area. There's other areas around Vancouver as well that are being really hard hit, but it is Eby's riding for sure that has the highest concentration of them. I did a little Google drive down a very snazzy area. I'd only be able to drive through there and keep on going. But I did a little Google search around that region, and I went around one corner. It was about a neighborhood street and a half, and it already soaked up $1 million worth of taxes just from this school tax. So they're going to be really raking it in on this.
We'll have more with Kris Sims right after this.
Arctic Star Exploration, operated by a team of proven mine finders, is focused on diamonds in Finland and the Northwest Territories of Canada. Work programs are underway in Finland and planned for Canada this summer. Arctic Star trades on the TSX Venture Exchange symbol ADD, on Frankfurt symbol 82A1, and the OTCQB symbol AESDZF. Please visit our website arcticstar.ca or call us at 604-689-1799.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Kris Sims. Kris, Finance Minister Carol James has said she doesn't believe a survey that was taken of small businesses who say the health payroll tax is going to be devastating. The survey said that 61% of them will be double paying, double dipping. 28% say they'll have to reduce employee benefits because of it. 24% say they'll reduce staff because of it. And they're also thinking of taxing non-profits with this payroll tax. What's your opinion?
Oh, well, the finance minister can choose to disbelieve it, but it's frankly math, and it's just straight up hard math. If you are going to impose a health tax, just call it a tax, on any business that functions that has a payroll of more than $500,000, you're going to hit an awful lot of small businesses and medium-sized businesses, because it's actually very easy. Say you're running a very good restaurant and you've got 3 different shifts for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's easy to get a payroll of over $500,000. And then also keep in mind there's all sorts of different forms of small businesses and medium-sized businesses. And for her to disbelieve it, that's really odd, because frankly, where does she think that money is going to come from? If you impose an employer health tax on employers, it's employers that are going to have to pay it. And employers aren't just these magical, monopoly men characters that carry around bags of money. They have a certain amount of funding. They have a certain amount of funding that comes in from whatever business it is they do. Then they pay out to their employees, and in some cases they also help them with benefits, all sorts of stuff. They have overhead that they need to pay. So this money has to come from somewhere. So if you suddenly impose a brand new tax on them, what did she think was going to happen? And then keep in mind also, it isn't just what we typically think of with a small, medium-sized business, with literally a parking lot and a storefront and maybe a cash register. It's municipalities. So if you take a look at towns and cities, it's almost instantaneous that you'll wind up with a technical payroll of more than $500,000 when you add up the staff, when you add up the maintenance, and you add up emergency services, all that other stuff. You tack that up to more than $500,000 very easily. So now, guess what? These towns and smaller cities are suddenly being stuck with a massive employer health tax bill that they, in some cases, didn't need to pay before with the MSP. And they're absolutely right. For a while, there will be double dipping on this, because they're keeping the MSP at 50% while imposing this new employer health tax. It's actually how they technically managed to balance their budget. I think it was about $200 million and change or so back during February's budget. And that amount of a double dip is what covered that cost. And so they're absolutely right that this is causing a double dip, and this is going to cause people in some cases to be laid off, to have reduced hours. It's not good for employers. And so I don't know where she's finding her surprise here.
Wouldn't it make more sense to fund it through income tax, so it's based on your ability to pay, not on how big your payroll is?
In some cases, and I think that the committee that was first looking at that had been commissioned to take a look at this, was thinking of that idea as well. But also keep in mind, like when we were looking at what was happening, when my predecessor, Jordan Bateman, was looking at what was happening with the medical services premium, the MSP, the amount of money it cost to even administer this thing was just galling. And so it cost a ton of money. It was not efficient. And frankly, we don't see the government really being careful with efficiencies and trying to save all the money they can. So frankly, we'd like to see them actually pay for health care, including the big transfers they get from the government in Ottawa, from the feds. We'd like to see them actually administer it in a very frugal manner so that we get the care we need, but they keep it within their existing budget. We're not convinced that they need an extra special health care tax tacked onto everything else that we pay. Keep in mind that the average Canadian pays more than 40% of their incomes in taxes, tolls, fees, you name it. And the idea that somehow the province isn't able to make that work without hitting us with an extra tax called a health tax, we just don't buy it. And so until we see them being very careful with their finances and not blowing taxpayers' money left, right, and center, and not, for example, trying to stop things like the Kinder Morgan pipeline, which produces a lot of tax dollars, both in the actual company paying out in taxes and also from salaries from people who have good-paying jobs working on that line. Until we see that sort of stuff happening, we're not going to be convinced that you need a special and secondary health tax.
Isn't Kinder Morgan one of the biggest property taxpayers in Burnaby?
It sure is, and apparently I think it's also one of the biggest property taxpayers in Coquitlam as well. And so if you just take a look, just pretend it's a pipeline of candy if you want, or whatever it is you like. It's just physically there. It has tank farms, it's got a pipe, it's got all these different facilities. So geographically speaking, it is a big property taxpayer. And I was reading a little while ago that apparently there was some expansion they wanted to do just to their physical property. I think it's part of their functioning. And I was reading somewhere that one expansion would pay enough property taxes to supply garbage pickup for the city of Coquitlam for a year. That's how big it is. And so the idea to have the government in Victoria fighting tooth and nail against one of the biggest corporations that gives the most money and the most salaries and the most property taxes into our economy in BC, it's like eating your own seed corn. You know, it just doesn't make any sense.
Do we know how much the legal fight by BC and Burnaby and Vancouver will cost taxpayers?
Not yet, but I'm just going to blanch when we get the final bill. So we usually need to wait for everything to be said and done. And of course, you know, I might be 80 years old by the time that happens, but once that's all said and done, we will be taking a look and adding up all of those court costs. Just to put in perspective, if you take a look at, say, the $12 billion that the federal government is now going to have to spend to get this thing built, if they're able to get it built, think of what that $12 billion could have actually paid for. Keep in mind this was money we weren't planning on spending and didn't need to spend. A corporation literally wanted to do it and to pay us to do it. So, take a look at this now, this big deficit, this $12 billion. You would be able to provide clean drinking water and state-of-the-art waste treatment systems for every First Nations region across Canada 4 times over. You would be able to take Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, which is one of the best kids hospitals in the whole world, the new one they want to build with the university and everything involved, everything. You'd be able to rebuild that thing 4 times. Like, it's just a staggering amount of money that they just, at the drop of a hat, just wasted. So it's because of actions like what we're seeing with the government in Victoria that is causing these big fumbles in Ottawa, and it's really grievous for taxpayers.
Kris, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you very much for caring about these issues. It really matters.
I've been speaking with Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Her website, taxpayer.com. If you have any questions for Kris or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.